Okay, our recording has started, Jessica. I think I hear that you are on the call. Could I just check your mic real quick?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And I'm going to mute you until it's time for you to talk, okay?
Great, thank you.
No problem. All right, now we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. Today's webinar is School Breakfast, Making Breakfast Part of the School Day. This is a rescheduled webinar from last week during the Northeast snowstorm that we had that impacted quite a few of our panelists as well as myself, who is located on the East Coast. We are going to go ahead and get started. We have a pretty packed agenda today, and we have great presenters. We are joined by Jessica Sankey from Bellingham Public Schools. We are also joined by Summer Kriegshauser from Share Strength No Kid Hungry campaign, and who will be sharing a bunch of resources for Breakfast After the Bell. And my name is Ellen Dillon. I'm the Senior Manager of School Breakfast Programs for Action for Healthy Kids. And I will be both presenter and moderator today for our webinar. All right, before we get started too much, we want to make sure everyone is aware of the logistics of today's webinar. You can choose to listen via the telephone or speakers. You can just choose the audio button on the right-hand panel, which might look a little different than the image on the right here, just because our go-to has recently been updated. Everyone is muted by default, so you will not have background noise going on. So if you're in a school or in an office building where there might be noises, don't worry about it, you are muted. But we want you to submit your questions. So if you have a question during the presentation, whether during any of the different slides or when anyone's speaking, feel free to put them in. We will pause periodically, but we will definitely save time at the end to answer as many of the questions as we can. If we're getting a common theme, we'll make sure that that question gets themed and we can answer that for everyone. This call is being recorded. This, as well as resources that are referenced, will be linked in an email that will be sent out to you within 2 business days. You can pretty much expect this to come on Monday. I tend not to send things on Friday because they tend to get buried and then you didn't realize you got it. So I will be sending that email to you likely on Monday. Again, just put your questions in and we will get to them as soon as we are able. So here's our agenda for today. I'm going to give you an overview of who we are, Action for Healthy Kids, and why this type of discussion is important. I'm going to give an overview of Breakfast After the Bell, what it is and why it is important and how it helps to feed hungry kids and impact schools across the country. We're going to hear about Bellingham's story from Jessica and hear what some of the challenges as well as the successes that have taken place with their Breakfast After the Bell models. We're then going to hear from Summer, who's going to give us, oops, we got a typo in there, I'll fix that, resources for change. And so she'll be providing a bunch of No Kid Hungry's resources so that you can have them to make changes at your school. And again, we'll be building in time for question and answers. But again, get your questions in as they come in, and we'll make sure we answer them. So who is Action for Healthy Kids? If you are not familiar with us because you've worked with us in the past, attended one of our webinars, and this is your first opportunity to hear from us, we are a national nonprofit. We are working to end childhood obesity, undernourishment, and physical inactivity by working with schools to help schools be healthier places and thereby helping our children be better and able to learn. And that is our goal and that is our mission of the work that we are doing. We are made up of tons of people that are on the call today, as well as parents and teachers, national and local nonprofits who are working on similar issues and causes, agencies that are partnered with us, and many of the stakeholders in the school level who are concerned about helping our children be healthier and more ready to learn. We were formed in 2002 by the then Surgeon General, David Satcher, who came up with the term of childhood obesity being an epidemic. And Action for Healthy Kids came out of many of those that were called to action to make changes. And we are working with schools because schools are the place where most of our students spend a majority of their time. This is also the place where they're learning habits and behaviors of what's acceptable as well as what is going to make a difference as they move forward and as they grow up. It's also where standards are in place for health standards as well as for physical education and nutrition instruction. And this is where our schools are teaching our students what we value and what's important to our community. So that's why we're focusing on schools. And the bottom line is that having the opportunity and access to healthy and good food, moving kids, getting them active, equals students and kids equipped for success. So we know that when students eat a healthy school breakfast, their academics improve, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward, as well as when they're able to be active during the school day, they're more able to attend to the tasks at hand and are more able to be successful academically, and then in turn be able to graduate and move on to being successful members of society. So first, before we get too much into what is Breakfast After the Bell, we want to talk about some of the things that are challenges for our current breakfast program. We call these traditional breakfast before the bell, before the school bell, and that means it's what many of us might have in our classrooms or in our schools now related to school breakfast. It's often in the cafeteria, and the problem with cafeterias is that they're not large enough. They're not able to fully house all the students if they should choose to participate in school breakfast. That's why lunch shifts are in place in schools across the country, because there's no way we can have all students participate at the same time. The problem with cafeterias is they're often not conveniently located. Students enter the building at one point, and cafeterias, especially in some older buildings, can be in the basement, and students are entering on the second level. They're often maybe in the back of the building, and students are coming in on the front where the bus loop or the parent drop-off might be. So it really does require a lot of more effort to get to the cafeteria when breakfast is offered in the cafeteria before the bell. It also requires students to arrive early, and this can be a huge barrier because most students don't have control over when they arrive. Either they're arriving on a bus or they're arriving with a parent, being a parent drop-off or parents walking them to school, or sometimes they're walkers, and yes, they have some control over that, but it still requires them to get to school early enough to be able to eat. Other barriers that keep them from wanting to participate in breakfast before the school day is that there are other activities that are impacting whether they can get to school on time and or get to breakfast. They might want to socialize with friends or play on the playground. And so those priorities for students, whether they be high school students or junior high, middle school age, or elementary school, those can all impact their ability to get to breakfast. And there's also a stigma related to school breakfast versus school lunch. With school lunch, all students are coming into the cafeteria and they're participating in lunch unless it's an open campus at a high school level where they may have that flexibility to leave the school. Most have to attend lunch in the lunch room. So, you know, eating lunch and buying a lunch or participating in a school lunch isn't as noticeable, whether you're paying or you're a free student or a reduced student. But for some reason, the breakfast, when it's served in the cafeteria before the school bell, it really seems to single out those students that qualify for the free and reduced meals. So there's just more of a stigma, and we know, especially as students increase their age and are more concerned about what others are thinking, this is a detriment and a barrier to participation. And we also know that time is, the time that breakfast is offered before the school bell can be a barrier, especially as we're talking about middle and high school students that might be starting the day really early, and they are not really ready to eat too early in the day, or schools where students have been on the bus for a long period of time and then they arrive at school and don't have the time to eat, or they're not as hungry as they might be when a little bit later in the day. So those are all barriers that could be why a traditional before school bell breakfast is not so successful. And if we look at our participation at schools currently, we know that we're not feeding all of our students, nor are we feeding the students that many schools are striving to feed, and those are those that are qualifying for free and reduced meals. They're not participating. So what is breakfast after the bell? So in simplest terms, breakfast after the bell means that breakfast is served after the start of the school day, meaning the bell signals the start of the school day and breakfast is served. And it could be served in a couple of different manners or methods. We'll talk about that. And we call them models. And you'll see breakfast after the bell going forward with the acronym BAB. So just so you know, if you see it as we talk, that's what it stands for. So what is breakfast after the bell, and what models seem to work for breakfast after the bell? Well, breakfast in the classroom, it is truly the best model in terms of increasing participation among all students, whether it be elementary, middle, or high. We have seen breakfast in the classroom be the most successful way of increasing participation and feeding more students. So these are just some different ways of looking at the different models. So breakfast in the classroom is just that. Breakfast is brought to the classroom at the start of class or before students arrive, or if students are picking up the breakfast and bringing it to their classroom. Students eat in the classroom together, and then whatever is left over is returned to the cafeteria at the end of the day. Trash is cleaned up, and students are ready to start their day. There are lots of benefits to this model in particular, and we'll talk about some of the different benefits in just a few minutes. But this is really the one where it's the most undivided attention that students have, and they're most likely to participate in breakfast when it's served in the classroom. There's also another model called second chance breakfast. Second chance breakfast can often fall in between a mid-morning break, and so a little bit of time might be built into the day, or it could be at a time when students are transferring classes. You know, it's just being able to offer breakfast in a time that might not have been right at the start of the day or before the school bell rang. It can be served in the cafeteria, or it can be served in multiple locations from service carts or kiosks, which are strategically located around the school building or in one location. I've seen second chance breakfast be very successful, especially at the high school, middle school level, where students are changing class, and you know, and then being able to move them through either a cafeteria or these kiosks in a very short amount of time, and then they go right back into their classroom and continue their day. And that's another very successful model. And then we also have grab-and-go breakfast. And grab-and-go breakfast is best served when students are able to pick it up and take it to their classroom. So we kind of call it grab and go to the classroom is a little bit more descriptive way of describing grab and go. And this can be Ideally, it's something that they're picking up on their way into the school or part of that mid-morning break. And again, it's served from multiple locations, with meaning that thinking about where students are entering the building, where are they congregating, what are your highest traffic locations. Again, cafeterias are located in one part of the building, students are entering at another. You really want to make sure your kiosk or carts are located in a way that makes it very easy for students to participate. And you'll kind of notice the theme here is it's bringing the food to the students rather than the students to the food. It really is about making life easier for them, as well as removing as many of those barriers as we can. All right, so let's talk some of the benefits. There are tons of benefits related to breakfast after the bell, but primarily these are just some of the key benefits. It increases participation. We're going to hear from Jessica, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the impacts of things that have happened at her district. But in the bottom line is, by increasing participation, we're doing a couple of things. We're increasing students being fed, so we're reducing hunger. We're also increasing revenue in our schools and in our districts that really help to make our programs both sustainable as well as allow for funding to incorporate more healthy food items, and you start to see like the snowball effect. So the more funding that's coming into your district, the more flexibility you have to try new foods and try new menu options and be a little bit more creative where you might not have been able to do some of those things before because you were pretty tied to your profit loss records, and so you really couldn't do a whole lot. But now you have more funding coming in that you can make those changes happen and create healthier and more appealing menu options. It helps to eliminate the stigma related to only certain students are eating breakfast. We've talked about why that's a problem, so we really, I don't think, need to talk about that too much more. Improved academic outcomes. Bottom line is, when we move breakfast after the bell, it helps to encourage students to attend school, and it helps to encourage students to attend school on time. So we know that attendance improves and tardy students are reduced when we make breakfast after the bell. I was recently in a district in Austin, Texas, where students, it was a high school of about 3,000 students, and they were all in their class at the start of, before the bell even rang, because they were having breakfast. And it was pushing students to come to school, and it was helping to get them into the classroom rather than maybe loitering in common areas or hanging out in a courtyard where they might have been hanging out prior. So they were already in the classroom at the start of the day. So that's really important, and it's really important to you know, the academic time and instructional time that we'll talk a little bit more about as we move forward too. And we know that when students are eating breakfast, they have more focus in the classroom, and they have improved behavior. We know that schools have reported decrease in discipline issues and more attention. Teachers are sharing that there's more attention on task when they've had breakfast. So the more often that we can help to feed these students, there's more positive outcomes from it as well. And we know the bottom line is, when you are in class, you're able to focus. You're not focusing on your hungry belly, then you're also able to learn better, and you're able to perform better on tasks such as math and reading and the instructions of the day. So we see test scores are improving as well. We know that when students are not hungry, there's also fewer nurses visits, especially in the morning hours. And so they're not complaining of stomach aches and headaches and focusing on their hungry bellies, but they're in class because they're not going to see the nurse. And there's this increased sense of community, especially with breakfast in the classroom. And that can be a huge benefit of breakfast in the classroom and breakfast after the bell, where students are eating together, eating with the teacher often, and they're really getting kind of to know one another. It's that breaking bread with each other really creates a sense of community. I think that's one of the biggest things we hear from teachers all of the time is that, you know, maybe they were a little leery about it at first, or they're thinking it was going to be a mess, but, you know, all of these benefits really help to outweigh any of the concerns that might have been in place prior. And the sense of community in the classroom is a big win, especially regarding breakfast in the classroom. So there are some concerns about offering breakfast after the bell, especially grab-and-go, or excuse me, breakfast in the classroom models. The biggest question is it going to impact instructional time? Often we find that teachers tell us that it actually increases instructional time because students are now in the classroom ready to learn rather than in the hallways or in the cafeteria trying to get their breakfast or scrambling at the grab-and-go cart to pick up their breakfast. So, you know, having breakfast in the classroom or grab-and-go to the classroom really helps to increase instructional time. So using breakfast in the classroom, it actually starts the academic day. So as you can see, and even in the picture on the right-hand side, the teacher is already starting instructions and students are attending class and sitting there eating their breakfast. And we also know that many educational agencies are supporting and providing letters of support. So depending upon what state you might be located in, you may already have these letters of support from your departments of ed. A few years back, the National Department of Ed put out a letter supporting breakfast in the classroom and breakfast after the bell models. So if you're not sure if your state has one, you might want to connect with your Department of Ed to see if there is a letter of support from your state agencies regarding breakfast after the bell models. And we're talking about breakfast after the bell. It's not just for elementary students, and it's really important that we keep that in mind, especially when we're talking about middle and high school students, because there are a lot of barriers that are particular to middle and high school. So using and utilizing breakfast after the bell has a great impact at that middle and high school level. Because often the schedules are more flexible, you can kind of be a little bit more creative in breaks and points of start and end times. But they can also have greater barriers. So the freedom of choice at the elementary level, students will eat because their parent or teacher tells them to. At the high school and middle school level, that's not the case anymore. It's a matter of, is this something I want to do, and it's not something that someone's telling me to do. So making it appealing, making it something that students want to participate in is really important. And the stigma tends to be a bit greater at these highly impressionable ages where everyone is looking around to see what everyone else is doing and or thinking of them, and whether it's real or not, that's perceived. There's also a focus and concern about weight consciousness. And so we know that students that eat breakfast have a less chance of having obesity issues, and a school breakfast is designed around the USDA meal pattern that has certain meal requirements as well as requirements in terms of caloric intake, and it's more healthy than a lot of the things that students at this age are eating. And we also know that some of the high school students have varying schedules. Either they are arriving super early in the morning because that's what time breakfast or school starts, or maybe they have staggered schedules, so they're coming in at different times, or, you know, it's just a matter of the fact that maybe they are not hungry too in the morning, and we've talked about that being an issue across the board, but especially at the middle and high school, where students will sleep as long as they possibly can and then attend school, and rushing to school and not often eating breakfast, whether they can pay for it or not. So these are all issues that come to bear when we're talking about middle and high school students participating in school breakfast. And we know that there's states that are making efforts to bring breakfast after the bell to more schools. And we've seen that in state legislation in some of these locations around the country, where it makes it mandatory to provide breakfast after the bell, especially in our highest need or high poverty schools. It could be schools that have 70% or more that are qualifying for free or reduced meals are now charged with providing a breakfast after the bell model. Other states are writing in for additional funding to support breakfast after the bell, and we're starting to see that whether it's been approved or it's in the beginning stages in states like California, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. So we are starting to see that this is really helping to lead the charge in making breakfast after the bell a more normal process as well. I'm going to pause before we jump into Jessica, and I'm just going to do, I've got a question from Carolyn about what about food mess in the classroom, and that's a great question, and maybe Jessica can talk a little bit more about that as she gets ready to tell us about what's going on in her school district. But classroom mess is always a concern. It's definitely a concern to teachers as well as principals and custodians. But there are lots of ways to make it a non-issue, and that's to create a plan and have a plan in place to dispose of items, to do cleanup, and it's also about expectations. And schools that have well-run classrooms and teachers that have good management styles will also have really good cleanup methods and cleanup processes. So it's really important to create those plans in place before, and then that way mess is minimized, and having a plan for cleanup is important too. So I think for the most part, we are finding that mess is less of an issue than a reality than what is perceived before it actually rolls out. And if planning is in place to make sure that there are trash cans strategically placed, that you're using strong trash bags in the classroom really helps as well. So making sure you have the materials and the resources is important. Okay, we've got another question from Jan. Lower elementary school students likely need help opening packaging. How does this affect instructional time? Again, great question. So in terms of it's funny, we've seen, I think maybe even Jessica will remember, I was visiting her school district back in October, and one of the teachers or principals had said at one of her schools was that they were already doing breakfast in the classroom at their pre-K program. So we're like, oh, well, if the pre-K students can handle it, pretty much anyone can handle it. And so that kind of gives us some plus with that as well. But, it's also that there's lots of things that can qualify for instructional time. It's the collecting of paperwork. It's the listening to announcements. It's the, independent reading time. So there's lots of things that can be done in the classroom where a teacher could still assist, and maybe that's where some parent volunteers come into play, or teaching assistants and things like that can also help with packaging. And it's also working with your food service department to make sure that, if you find that there's something that's being sent in that really doesn't work for opening, that they learn really quick. Let's not use that one anymore, and let's try to avoid that kind of a situation so that students aren't struggling. We hear that breakfast in the classroom or food that's brought into the classroom, it's really important to be thinking about how easy is it for the student to eat it? So second grade students might not be having whole apples. They might want to be having sliced apples because we know in first and second grade there's a lot of missing teeth, and so eating that apple is going to be more of a struggle for those students. And thinking about what else we can do to make both opening, closing, cleanup as easy as possible. And so they often steer away from items that are going to roll off the table or fall on the classroom floor or be mashed or spilled or syrup that's very sticky. So it's really about thinking about what is going to work and then learning from what is and isn't working and making changes from there. All right, so that's our questions for now. Let's go ahead and move forward. So we have Jessica Sankey. She is the Wellness Coordinator at Bellingham School District in Bellingham, Washington. And Jessica, I'm going to go ahead and let you kind of introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us about Bellingham, and then we can kind of walk through some of these slides. Jessica? And I'm going to unmute you just one second. Bear with me. All right, Jessica.
There we go. Can you hear me?
There you go. Yep, you are perfect.
Perfect. Great, thank you. Hi everybody, I'm glad to be here today, and I'm really love to talk about how breakfast in the classroom works in Bellingham. It's been a really fun project. We are a mid to big-ish district with 11,000 students, and we're spread across 22 school buildings, 14 of which are elementary buildings. So we have a big number of pretty small schools. Our overall free and reduced rate is about 30%, but what's interesting about this community is that we have a pretty big range. So we had one elementary school that's over 80% free and reduced, 5 that are over 60%, and at least 2 that are under 20%. And these are all in a pretty small geographic area. Like one of our lowest free and reduced rate elementary schools at 18% is only 2 miles away from our highest free and reduced lunch rate school, which is over 80%. So we have these, what our health department says is that we have overall, we have a really high standard of living and we have a relatively affluent population, but the disparities are really hidden in the averages, and we have these disparities that are very localized by neighborhood. So another part of the story is that breakfast participation in our district was very, very poor. So we had the one school with the highest free and reduced rate. We had gone through the process to use the community eligibility program. So we were offering breakfast for free for every student in that school. But we had at our highest, I think, it was about 43% of our kids were participating in breakfast the year before we switched to breakfast in the classroom. So we knew that breakfast participation was really low. We knew that we had hungry kids, and we knew that we wanted kids to be eating breakfast before school. And the other thing that was very real here is the stigma of breakfast. It was a very different experience if your family was eligible for free and reduced rate and you chose to eat breakfast than if your family was not eligible. The only kids who were eating breakfast really were kids who were eligible for free and reduced lunch, and that sort of marker followed those kids throughout the day. I mean, it was just very obvious to everyone that the only kids eating breakfast were eligible, for free and reduced rate. So, seeing all this, we have the other piece of this that is interesting here is that we have a very strong community support looking at community hunger relief and looking at local foods and healthy foods and making healthy food accessible to all our entire population. So we have a really active farm to school group that is interested in this. And the Farm to School group had gone, I think in 2011 about, to go hear Kate Adamick speak. And Kate Adamick, I believe she's the food service director in Greeley, Colorado. But for sure, I know that she wrote a book called Lunch Money. And she had a whole chapter on breakfast and what increasing breakfast participation can do for your school meal program. And just as a parent volunteer, I went along to this talk and came home with the book because I was pretty fascinated and had, dog-eared the chapter on breakfast and then carried it around with me for a couple of years until I had the opportunity to step into this position at the school district where I got to actually look at our practices around food and healthy activity for kids. So we had a lot of knowledge outside the school district about how breakfast could look and a lot of interest in supporting a different breakfast model. Our United Way had advocated at the state level for breakfast after the bell, and our local food bank has been a tremendous supporter of alternative breakfast models, but we just didn't have the capacity within the district to make changes to our food service program until we had the opportunity to add some staff and some time to sit back and really examine our current practices and where we could make some changes. So very, very quickly, it became obvious that breakfast it's kind of low-hanging fruit. It was something we were serving anyway. Participation was really low, and we knew that there were these great models happening across the country, and that we didn't have to reinvent the wheel to make some changes to breakfast. So, and then another key part of this shift that we made was we had very strong superintendent support. So once the community kind of came together and made the case for why we should be looking at our breakfast model, our superintendent is a big believer in supporting equity and making sure that kids' basic needs are met. And from that perspective, breakfast is critical. So having superintendent support was fabulous because what happened was he said, it's my expectation that we'll find a way to increase breakfast, and it's up to you all to figure out how to do it, increase breakfast participation. So then we got busy looking at what would work. And it was at that point that we applied for support from Action for Healthy Kids, which was absolutely instrumental for us to have some startup funding to think about how we could make some changes to breakfast. And then another big thank you I have is that Ellen came out to visit at a moment when we really, really needed some expert eyes on our program. So it was really great to have an outside perspective, somebody who really understood how well breakfast after the bell can work and does work. And we had some little struggles with little technical things, and it was nice to hear, just a reminder that this works very well in districts much larger than ours, and that a reminder that indeed we were working to meet a need that was so important, and it was worth struggling through the tactical problems. So we started with thinking about how this was going to look and working with key stakeholders, and so we really started with the administration. And we prepared kind of a little roadshow about why we thought breakfast was important, why we felt that breakfast participation needed to go up, and how breakfast in the classroom could look and why it was the best model. So we went to several meetings. We began with our executive team, and there was the food service staff and me, and we showed up and we gave a little talk about why it was important, and then we showed how breakfast could look. And we served everyone breakfast in a breakfast in the classroom style during the meeting. So we're having this meeting talking about breakfast. The principals are munching away on apples and these yummy apple cinnamon bars that we serve. And they're talking about, well, what about mess? What about instructional time? What about, and all the questions that came up and will come up and do come up came up in that meeting while they were eating, at which point one of our principals said, look at us, we're having a meeting while we're eating breakfast. It's perfect. This is exactly how it will look in our classrooms. Instructional time continues while children are eating. It's a great relationship time. It's a good time for conversation. We're hashing out all these issues. So it was this really nice kind of accidental modeling of what we would want to see in our cafeterias, and it did a better job, in our program, and it did a better job of explaining what we were wanting to do than we ever could have with just a presentation. So it was really great to be able to serve an example breakfast to folks. It was another powerful issue that came up is that we have, the way it worked before was that kids would come early to school and they had to choose to either go outside and play or come in and eat breakfast. And, as I said before, the stigma felt very real, so that was one disincentive to coming to eat breakfast. And also, these were kids who were ready to be active and ready to play with their friends, and the majority of kids are outside playing. They wanted to go outside and play. And we really, we've struggled to make sure we have enough PE instructional minutes and active minutes in this district. And so the last thing we wanted to do was to force students to choose between being active and eating. So it was really great to be able to say, look, now kids don't have to choose. They come early to school. They get to play outside with their friends. They kind of get their yayas out. Then they come in, go to their classroom, sit down together with their peers, eat breakfast together, and start their day. And that, that is indeed how it has played out. It's been really nice to remove that choice from students so that they actually get to do both. Another thing that happened right away that we noticed, a big win, it was, I think, the first day that we started, we noticed this. There are a couple buses for a few schools that they come right when the bell rings, right? They don't come early enough for kids to get breakfast usually. And so kids would come in from the bus, and if they wanted breakfast, they would go sit down and have breakfast, and they would miss classroom time, and go late to class. And if they were kids who weren't especially excited about classroom time, then they might stretch their breakfast out even further. And we had a few kids who would just show up late, really reluctant to get to their classroom. They would grab a breakfast and sit and chat with their friends and stretch that breakfast out. And right away, we have kids now who show up, if they're showing up right on time, they get to go right to their classroom, sit with their peers, and eat breakfast, and also get their day started, even if that's not maybe their very first choice. So the key stakeholders that we really needed to have on board, and I would say we did a medium good job of engaging everybody in advance. We worked really closely with principals to think how it would look in their schools. We did communication with parents that I felt pretty good about. We did work with teachers to make sure they felt prepared, and I felt pretty good about that. We did not do a great job connecting with our nurses in advance, and I wish we had figured out a better way to work with them earlier, because it didn't occur to us how impacted they might be with thinking about their students who are diabetic and making sure they had their carb counts and they were ready, and kids who had known allergies. The menu is pretty allergen free, but we could have worked with them even more closely to be a little bit more prepared, so they felt prepared. And we didn't work with our custodian. Our custodians don't generally get together and have meetings very often, and so we did not pull them together before this started, and we should have. We worked with them one-on-one, but it would have been really helpful to have more group meetings so custodians could brainstorm together about models that would work in advance. But I will tell you that after the fact, what we hear is really, really positive feedback. So I feel like it's overall definitely a success. So what we do is breakfast in the classroom, and it's a universal model, and we do it in only 6 of our schools. So our 6 schools that are eligible for Title I funding are the schools that we are offering breakfast to every single student in the classroom. The students go to the cafeteria, 2 of them go to the cafeteria, they pick up the breakfast that's been packed out by our food service staff, and they wheel it to their classroom with wheelie carts that were supported by Action for Healthy Kids. Thank you very much. And then they set it up in their classroom, and kids come in from recess or to begin their day. They go through the line, which is really just a table at the back of their classroom. They pick out their breakfast. They sit down at their desk. They have conversation usually and eat their breakfast. We have seen that over over the course of the year, what I have teachers tell me is that it's just gotten smoother and smoother, and it takes less and less time. So school starts at 8:30. It's our goal to have breakfast finished and packed up and back to the cafeteria with the the garbage and the extra, or the cart goes back to the cafeteria by 9. And that was really a struggle at the beginning of the year, and now it's a piece of cake, and it's usually completed earlier than that. So it's been really smooth. We have a 1-week cycle menu, and we needed to start with that for ease of ordering and service. And that's my goal for next year, would be to figure out how to get a little more variety into that menu, because kids are ready for some new things in breakfast. So I hope that we're able to move to maybe a 2-week cycle menu and a few more things in our menu for offerings. A couple things that were really important to us as we got started. So during our rollout, we had a lot of volunteers and lots of folks who were interested in helping in the classroom. And that was really great, because honestly, we didn't know what we were doing. So we started I think we served cereal on the first day in blister packs. And we really did need a lot of hands on deck to help open those packs and help the milk get poured and try to clean up any spills. Another thing that was important was being really responsive to classroom needs. So that's the way we rolled it out, and then we quickly discovered, the teachers just absolutely hated the cereal. Nobody liked the waste from the individual blister packs, and there was lots of milk spilled, and many times kids would open them and the cereal would go flying. So we heard that story often, and it was important for the success of the program overall to be able to respond to that and try to figure out what else we could offer. So I think we started the year with cereal 3 times a week, then we went down to 2 times a week, and this year we began the school year with no cereal in our breakfast in the classroom menu, and that's just been fine. The kids miss it. Kids really like cereal, but it's definitely cleaner for us, and it takes a little bit less time, and it's easier. And I think we have good alternatives instead.
So Jessica, can I just jump in real quick, if you don't mind? If you look at the screen that we have here, I think this kind of tells the story really well too. Of her 6 schools that she mentioned being involved in this program, they were averaging 31% in 2015, and they're currently averaging around 85% participation. So, that's pretty powerful. And I think, have you been able to share that type of data with your districts, with your other schools in your district, or is anyone noticing that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's and the first people who notice are actually the community partners. The people who've been big advocates for this in the past are just thrilled. And in fact, and then just the word on the street and the general feeling is so positive about it. So I have teachers who stop me often and tell me how grateful they are and how smooth it feels like it goes, and then also how much better prepared and ready their kids are. I hear that it's such a nice start to the day. So, and then I guess in terms of when I think about the data, what I'm thinking is, oh my gosh, what an incredible success, and how are we going to build on that, right? So these 6 schools are doing really well, but we have 9 other elementary schools that are not eligible for Title I funding. So we're trying to figure out how to improve breakfast participation in those schools. And then I think our low-hanging fruit is for our middle and high schools, where we know kids would like to eat more. And so that's our next step, is to look at a model to see a similar kind of success. But yeah, I mean, the data speaks for itself. It's just been a success. It's been great.
Great. And if you looked at the pictures throughout Jessica's presentation, it is from her district, and those are the students from her school. So, when we talked about instructional time, I think there was a picture of a classroom with the directions that a teacher would normally have on the screen, and one of which was grab your breakfast. And those kind of nudges and suggestions are really all helpful to keep it part of the day. Jessica, we're going to go ahead and move on, and if there are any questions, we'll come wrap back around. We didn't have any questions for you, but
Great.
we're going to go ahead and hear about some of the more of the resources from our partners from No Kid Hungry and the Share Our Strength program.
Perfect.
Great. Hello?
You're good.
Hi, can everyone? All right, thank you. Can you go back just one slide, Ellen? I just want to make sure everyone gets my name. Back another one. Oh, that must be it. Okay.
I think I might have lost that one. Sorry.
Okay,
We'll make
that's
sure
okay.
everybody gets it.
Okay, so my name is Summer Kriegshauser. I am a program manager at No Kid Hungry, and I'm going to be presenting several resources that can help you implement those breakfast after the bell models. And I just wanted to start off by telling a little bit about what we do at No Kid Hungry and what we do in this school space. So our whole mission is to end childhood hunger, and we do it in three really large buckets. First, we work on increasing access to the federal meals program. So increasing access to school breakfast, after school meals, and summer meals. We also have a Cooking Matters program where we actually go into the community and teach about nutrition education and food budget and things like that. And then we have a lot of our resources dedicated to actually changing legislation to move the needle on ending childhood hunger. So like Ellen was talking about earlier in the webinar, you know, there are various states that have actually passed legislation. And if we do have time, I'll talk about the legislation that was just passed in Illinois, but if not, we will skip that. Next slide, please. So I reside in the Center for Best Practices here at No Kid Hungry, and we do a lot of things where we conduct research about childhood hunger and about these programs like the Breakfast After the Bell models. We create tools and resources, and so today I'm going to be talking about some of those tools and resources that we have specific to Breakfast After the Bell models. Next slide, please. So this is our Center for Best Practices website. I have the hyperlink in the title. So when these slides are distributed with the PowerPoint presentation on Monday, you should be able to just click on that link and it should take you to our Center for Best Practices where all of these resources live. And as you can see, I highlighted that little subscribe button. We have a monthly newsletter that we send out that highlights all of our new resources and some of our old resources, and really gives you important information, sometimes really technical information about Breakfast After the Bell implementation, but also with summer meals and after school meals on how to increase participation. Next slide, Ellen. All right, so let's dive into implementing Breakfast After the Bell and some of the resources that we have that are really useful. Next slide, Ellen. So these videos we made with the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, and we're really excited about them because they're quick videos to help engage the stakeholders in the schools that are teachers and principals. So this isn't a deep dive into like what the cafeteria staff would need to know about Breakfast After the Bell. This is specifically for teachers and principals to see how breakfast in the classroom and grab and go to the classroom would actually affect their school and how it's done. These are animated videos, they're fun, they're less than 3 minutes. So this would be great to show at like a teacher's meeting or to show your principal that you're interested in Breakfast After the Bell and how it works. And both of our Breakfast in the Classroom video and grab and go to the classroom video are linked here. Next slide, Ellen. All right, so the pre-implementation checklist, this is also hyperlinked in the title. This is a really fantastic resource that maps out basically the action steps that schools can take to prepare for Breakfast After the Bell implementation, whether you choose breakfast in the classroom, grab and go to the classroom, or second chance breakfast. These steps are from actual school nutrition directors. I interviewed school nutrition directors who have already implemented Breakfast After the Bell and they see success in their programs. And I asked them, what advice would you give to other school nutrition directors about implementing Breakfast After the Bell? Or like, what do you wish you would have known during that preparation process when you were implementing Breakfast After the Bell in your school? And that's exactly what this checklist is. It gives multiple suggestions, and then at the very end, what you see on the screen is just the first page, but on the very end there's an actual checklist that you can go through to make sure you are doing these various prep items. And one of those is actually creating a school breakfast team. Like Jessica was mentioning earlier, engaging the various school stakeholders, including nurses, custodians. It's really important to get these group of stakeholders together to help prepare for Breakfast After the Bell implementation by letting them being a part of the planning process, so they not only have a voice in this process, but so they can actually help troubleshoot. Next slide, Ellen. And then if you want even deeper, an even deeper dive on implementation, we have our Breakfast After the Bell rollout timelines. We have one for breakfast in the classroom and one for grab and go to the classroom. And this gives long-term and short-term action items counting down week by week for what school stakeholders can do to prepare for Breakfast After the Bell. So we address what principals, school nutrition staff, teachers, nurses, custodians, and paraeducators can do week by week leading up to Breakfast After the Bell launch and then following it. So this is a really important resource, and it works it works well with the pre-implementation checklist. Next slide, Ellen. And with just one more minute left, I think this is the last resource that we'll get to today. We have a specific handout, and again, this is linked in the title, to help those schools that are specifically implementing in middle and high schools. Because we heard earlier that, you know, Breakfast After the Bell isn't just for elementary schools, definitely not. It's in middle schools and high schools across the country, but middle and high schoolers are different stakeholders than elementary schools. So we want to be just really aware and respectful of the needs of middle and high schoolers and how to incorporate them into the program so that you have success in your participation rates. So I will leave it there because we are just about out of time, and I'm going to toss it back over to you, Ellen.
Sure. Summer, I'm just going to let our attendees know that we're going to continue in another minute or two beyond the top of the hour, so that way we can share a few more of these important issues, and that way if anyone needs to jump off, they certainly can, but we'll continue to record, and all of this will be in your follow-up materials as well, because the information that Summer was sharing was so valuable. I didn't want to cut you too short. So if you wanted to keep going, Summer?
Sure, absolutely. And so this next resource, and again, these are just a few of our resources that live on our Center for Best Practices website. So I encourage you all to go to the website and just explore what resources we have, because we have many, many more that are helpful for engagement with school staff, with parents, and also specific implementation resources that are really technical but really, really useful at the same time. So the resource that you see on the screen is a breakfast FAQ for parents. And this came about because we kept hearing from school nutrition directors that parents would ask the same questions over and over again. It didn't matter where in the country, you know, the school was or the parents were, but school nutrition directors were getting the same questions from parents. So we created this resource both in English and Spanish, and both resources are hyperlinked there. You can see the blue underline. They are completely customizable. So as you can see in the picture on the right of the resource, you have all this yellow space. That yellow space is completely customizable. So schools can actually make this resource their own. We inserted the basic information about Breakfast After the Bell, and schools can add in their own pictures, they can add in their own timelines, anything they need to make it their own, but they don't have to recreate the wheel in terms of creating a handout for parents that are specific to the Breakfast After the Bell program. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's it for the resources today. I can talk a little bit about the Illinois legislation. Ellen, what are your thoughts on that? Do we have time for that?
I think we'll just do a very high level, and because it's coming up for the next school year, maybe just do a pretty high level and people can kind of read through it while you're doing a quick overview.
Okay, absolutely. So Illinois is one of those states that passed a breakfast after the bell legislation to be implemented in school year 2017-2018, so it's coming right up, and schools with 70%, at least 70% of students who qualify for free or reduced price meals are required to offer breakfast after the start of the school day. Schools can choose what model they implement, whether that be breakfast in the classroom, grab and go to the classroom, or second chance breakfast, or even a hybrid. Whatever works for, the school is fine by the, works with the legislation, as long as breakfast is being served after the bell, because as research has showed, that is the most effective way to increase breakfast access to get more kids fed. So we at No Kid Hungry are working with the Greater Chicago Food Depository and various other partners in Illinois to really help get schools ready for this legislation in school year 2017-2018. So all those resources you saw earlier on the PowerPoint, those will be included in a toolkit that we are creating, and we're really trying to get the word out there, not only to schools that would be affected by this legislation, but really getting the resources out there to help schools implement their breakfast after the bell model, help them choose what model works for them, and help them figure out the timeline and the path that they need to get to breakfast after the bell launch by 2017-2018 school year.
Great, thank you, Summer. We did have, here's Summer's contact information, and it will be in the follow-up material as well. And we'll make sure that the link for the Centers for Best Practices will be in the follow-up material, so you don't have to dig through the webinar to get there too. So just a couple of quick questions that came in. We had a question from Nubia regarding, is there a specific amount of time breakfast after the bell should be offered? Jessica, maybe I'll let you answer that in regards to breakfast in the classroom. Oh, I think I muted Jessica. Hold on one second. Jessica.
Hi there. I'm trying to remember what the federal requirements are. I know that for lunch, we are required to have 20 minutes of seat time. And I think that breakfast is, I can't remember if it's 10 or if it's 15. I know that it's shorter. We allow 20, and we find that we use much less than that. So as I said, it's gotten smoother. So now at this point in the year, it's no more than 15, usually more like 10 actually.
And if I could add to that,
go ahead,
can you hear me? Okay. Yes, I want to echo Jessica's point in that mostly all of the schools that actually we work with and that we grant to say it takes about 10 minutes, 15 at the most. So that's the common theme. So a lot 10 minutes and you should be fine.
Yeah, and I think too with arrival times and when school officially starts, there is that extra time built in too. So I think that's where when they start saying it's actually less time, some of the students might arrive 10 minutes before, class officially begins and they're already eating, and then they go on to start their day and their tasks at hand. So I think that really helps to make instructional time less impacted as well. Okay, quick question. Oh, I think that's everything in terms of our questions. All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up. One of the things that Jessica did mention, Action for Healthy Kids does have grants available for school breakfast. We also have grants available for physical activity and nutrition initiatives, but our breakfast grants are available. We have up to $3,000 per school. One school could apply, or an entire district, or parts of the district, similar to what happened in Bellingham. And they are available in all states. So we encourage you, if you're interested in grants, or to log in and check out our grants on our website, and you'll get some more information and can download links and things like that, or follow up with me for more information. If you are not currently following Action for Healthy Kids, we encourage you to do so. Facebook, we have a YouTube channel. as well as on Pinterest with lots of ideas that can be incorporated at your school, in your classroom, at home, and ways to really celebrate the great things that are happening at our schools regarding healthy eating and physical activity. Thank you for joining us today, and as I said, we will follow up with all of the materials and the recording, slide deck, links, and connections to all the great resources from No Kid Hungry. And any questions that you might have, you can follow up directly with me, and I will help you out from there. And thank you for sticking with us a little longer, for being here today as a rescheduled webinar. And thank you for Summer and Jessica for joining us and sharing all the great things that you had to share today. We will look forward to joining you again in the future, and thanks for joining us today. Take care.